Today on BRStv Investigates, it's time to really explore Kessil A360s. Hi, I'm Ryan, your host of BRStv Investigates, a weekly YouTube series which explores popular reefing theories, products, methods, what the manuals are missing with a focus on putting them to the test, and then we give away everything we test at the end. As part of that, we're going to evaluate reef tank lighting on all kinds of different fronts. Today, we're going to show you the deepest look into the Kessil A360 out there. Diving right into it, we're going to look at coral health factors first with providing adequate PAR, how the PAR is distributed, and spectrum. Our focus is always on SPS and higher demand corals when evaluating PAR because almost any common reef tank lighting can provide lower PAR required for LPS and lower light corals. That range for SPS that we're shooting for is in the 250 to 350 range and as much as a tank as possible. That range is coming from our episode called How Much PAR for SPS that dives into that question from a lot of different angles. To start that, we're going to look at PAR levels produced by a single A360W in a 24-inch cube with water and a black painted back. It's a bit unfair because the light's only designed to illuminate an 18-inch area when used for SPS tanks. I fully expect it to underperform on this 24-inch cube, but I'll show you how multiple lights perform in the 120 as well. Between all this, I think you'll get a pretty decent idea of how they emit and distribute light. There are a variety of color ranges on the Kessil, and which one you select will impact PAR to a small degree. We selected the 50% color position with the knob, which is around where most people will put it, and also in the neighborhood of where we saw the highest PAR outputs. One of the things I think is most important to note is how critical mounting height is. The box says mount it 1 to 2 feet over the tank, but that's really just for UL certification purposes. The mounting arm says 8 to 12 inches, but if you actually talk to someone at Kessil, they'll tell you 6.5 to 8 inches is ideal. So we're going to show you the differences an 1.5 inch makes and look at those two number sets. We're going to start by looking at the light mounted 6.5 inches above the water at a depth of 6 inches in the tank. There's a 36-point average of 150 PAR, with the center at or near 300, middle ring around 150 to 220, and the outside mostly in that near 100 to 150 range. You can see putting the light this close to the water maximizes the PAR, but that single point of light also creates a hot spot in the center of the tank where there's about 100 PAR fall off for each additional 4 inches you move from the center. Next, we lift the light up 1.5 inches to 8 inches above the water and take measurements at that same 6-inch depth. The difference is pretty notable. The overall 36-point average drops to 145, but that's only 5 PAR. However, the hot spot is much smoother with mid-200s in the center, and the fall off at every 4-inch point just 30 to 60 PAR. However, this impact is really only seen closest to the top of the tank once we drop the light back down to 6.5 inches above the tank and then take measurements at 12 inches deep inside the tank. You can see the light distribution is ultra flat. The wide angle lens on the Kessil does a fantastic job of distributing light evenly over the entire tank. Other than that back strip of the tank, almost all the points are within 20 points of each other in between 140 and 160 and a 36-point average of 144. Moving the light up to 8 inches above the tank, the average PAR is lower at 131, but other than the back of the tank, almost all the points are within 15 points of each other. The Kessil lens just does an awesome job of distributing light in the tank. Down at 18 inches deep in the tank, we're seeing the same thing. With the light 6.5 inches over the tank, we're looking at an average PAR of 125 in almost every point in the 130 to 140 range. Raising the light up to 8 inches at the same 18-inch depth, the average PAR is 118 with almost all the points in the 120 to 130 range. Before I comment on the overall PAR, I wanted to share one more data point for those of you that are setting up their systems and want to know the impact of tuning the intensity. Does tuning it to 50% intensity actually half the light, or is it something different? To do that, we tuned it to 50% intensity and mounted the light at 6.5 inches above the water. We'll take a quick look at the average PAR at all three depths. At a depth of 6 inches, we're seeing a 36-point average PAR of 150 at 100% and 74 at 50% intensity, which is almost exactly half. Same thing at a depth of 12 inches, 144 at 100% and 67 at 50%, which is only a few points off as well. Not surprisingly, the same at 18 inches with an average of 125 and 61. So I think it's reasonable to trust that the percentage adjustments are fairly reliable. Overall, looking at these measurements alone, I would say a single A360W is likely suitable for a mixed tank with SPS near the top, but not an SPS dominant tank. However, this is deceiving because if you put it on an 18-inch square tank, which Kessil recommends a light for when used with SPS, the glass would focus the light into a smaller area and would almost certainly be suitable for many SPS-dominant tanks. We don't have an 18-inch testing apparatus here, but to give you a better window into how this works in a way more realistic environment, we tested 2, 3, and 4 lights on a 4-foot, 120-gallon tank, and I'll absolutely say that 3 to 4 lamps is a much more common and realistic option for a full-blown SPS tank. This will also give you a much better idea of how the lights disperse or distribute light in the tank as well. We tested all 3 lighting setups at a height of 8 inches above the water, starting with the 2-lamp installation. You can see a very distinct pattern of 2 separate light sources here with an overall average par of 159, similar to the numbers in the 24-inch cube, which isn't surprising since a 120 is essentially 2 24-inch cubes side by side. However, there is one notable difference. Similar to the cubes where the light fall off on the sides is similar, where the light intersects between the 2 light sources is obviously higher, which raises the par in the center of the tank. So what happens when we add a 3rd lamp in the same mounting height and measurement depth? Note that 3 lamps now puts us really close to the manufacturer's recommendation of an 18-inch coverage area. While the 66-point average par increases to 230, and other than the outside edge, almost all the measurement points are now in that 250 to 350 pocket that we recommend. Moving to 4 lamps, or 1 every foot of the tank, we're now looking at a 66-point average par of 300, with most of the center measurements ranging from 200 to 500 par, which is pretty high. I'd say having 4 light sources like this puts us in the same neighborhood as the other premium lighting options out there, designed for 4 feet, and have a similar amount of LEDs or pucks. So what happens when we move down to 12 inches deep in the tank? With 2 lamps, you can see the highest pars in the center of the tank where the light from the 2 different light sources intersect, with an average of 144 and a vast majority of the readings in the 1 to 200s. Adding a 3rd lamp into the mix at the same 12 inches deep, the average par jumps to 210, and the center of the tank is obviously still the brightest, but other than the back of the tank, almost all the readings are within 100 points of each other and close to that 2 to 300 range. Adding in the 4th lamp, that average par jumps to 275, and almost every measurement point is directly in that 250 to 350 window that we're looking for, with that same even distribution with the majority of the measurement points within 100 points of each other. Moving down to 18 inches deep in the tank and near the bottom, this is what we saw with 2 lamps. An average par of 131 and a fairly flat distribution with the highest readings in the center between the 2, and at this depth, now up near the front of the glass as well. Most of the readings in the 100 to 180 range. Adding in the 3rd lamp, the average par jumps to 191, similar distribution with the par in the center front being the highest, and most of the readings in the 180 to 250 range. With 4 lamps, the par at a depth of 18 inches jumps to an average of 248, and other than the back, a majority of the measurement points still in that ideal 250 to 350 window, which is pretty impressive because the wide-angle lens distributes par so well, both horizontally and vertically. Moving on to spectrum, there are 2 elements to look at here, the spectrum offering, as well as how they blend all those LEDs into a single cohesive spectrum. LEDs are much different than older technologies because you need to select the individual colors, which have very narrow spectrum offerings, and then blend these colors into an individual combined spectrum. One of the things that we're going to learn here in this series is some brands and designs absolutely do this better than others. And other than the shadowing effects common from compact single points of light, properly blending spectrum is one of the biggest challenges both visually and biologically. The approach that Kessil has taken to this is quite different than others. Most of the larger competitors give you the keys to the spectrum kingdom and allow you to adjust all the individual channels to your whim. Whereas Kessil and their larger parent company, Dicon Fiber Optics, decided to research and produce a spectrum mix that's based on producing replicable results. The core of this is just providing the important blue spectrum almost everyone agrees is the most critical, and then giving you a knob to add green, yellow, and red, green and yellow being largely for visual appeal. The Kessil spectral range covers all the most common ranges from 420 to 500 and even near UV at 380 to 390, which many light sources are missing. I'll note there's a very distinct peak at 460 nanometers, which is a lighter blue. Some of the older technologies, common bulbs, and other LED options out there tend to result in an increased ratio of the deeper blue spectrum, particularly if your approach is just to set all the blue LED channels on max. I don't think the industry and hobby in general is settled on a true ideal spectral mix, so I can confirm the focus on the 460 peak better than other approaches. But what I can say is Kessil's approach is based on their own internal analytical research with the goal of producing a spectral mix which produces maximum results with reef tanks and a wide variety of coral species. The parent company, Dicon Fiber Optics, is a giant in all types of lighting technologies, including many that focus on spectrum and maximizing photosynthesis. This is quite different than giving you the keys to the spectral kingdom and then expecting you to somehow figure out the ideal spectral mix on your own. So all in all, while the mix is somewhat different than some other options and there is an intentional limited amount of adjustments for each channel, there is one thing we know for sure: it does produce results because we've all seen them on countless tanks. Moving on to spectral blending, this is one area where Kessil really shines. They have a patented design called a dense matrix array, which is where all the LEDs are packed tightly together under a single lens. Net effect of this is it almost perfectly blends all the individual spectrum LEDs into a single cohesive spectrum, something that almost none of the other competitive LED products out there can achieve without using large frosted diffusing lenses or raising the lights up really high, which significantly reduces PAR and makes the light much less energy efficient. To demonstrate this, we're going to look at two different spectrum blending tests. First is what we call static blending, where we just take measurements at 9 different points on a grid in air, 19 inches from the light source. This test is largely looking at placement and distribution of the LEDs and related impact. You can see as we look at all the different measurement points, the primarily blue spectrum spike stays the same, but there are spectrum variances as we move the sensor around. Second, we look at a dynamic spectrum, which is looking at how the reflectors and lenses on the LEDs are impacted by the surface ripples of the top of the tank, since these surface ripples are essentially lenses themselves. To do that, we add some surface agitation to the 24-inch cube with a power head, and then take 9 measurement points from underneath the tank directly in the center. Again, you can see only the most subtle changes in spectrum between all the different measurement points here. Certainly not anything that would impact coral health or growth. I would say it's pretty darn close to perfect spectrum blending. So all in all, looking at all angles of coral health, PAR intensity, PAR distribution, and spectrum, this light can grow corals. I think we certainly learned today that it's not just about saying, can an LED module provide enough PAR? It's more about how many, spacing, mounting height, and placement to not only achieve particular PAR goals, but also even distribution of that PAR. This is going to be the case with almost all of the LED modules out there. If I were using Kessils on 120 like this, I think a good implementation would be 3 modules mounted 6.5 to 8 inches off the water surface, but a real ideal solution, and the one that I would personally select, would be 4 modules mounted around 10 inches off the surface, which would not only increase the PAR, but also distribute the light more evenly and reduce shadowing effects common to many single points of light like LED modules. Cost-wise, 3 to 4 modules puts the A360 right in the middle of the most popular options out there for lighting a 120 like this. Moving on to elements of visual appeal with color pop, contrast, sense of depth, shimmer, lunar lights, and physical appeal. To me, LEDs are the king of color pop. They just seem to be better at doing the most with the coral's natural fluorescence. I think that's largely because the manufacturers are adding LEDs in with spectrums known for that, particularly in the deeper blue range, and then giving you the ability to adjust them to what's pleasing to your eye. In that spirit, I think the spectral mix that comes with the Kessil produces really solid color pop, but I wouldn't make the claim that it's the best out there, because I think that's somewhat intentional, because achieving the best color pop for your specific corals requires individual control over each individual LED spectrum. More or less, flipping switches until it looks nice is in direct conflict with Kessil's approach of attempting to achieve a specific spectral mix that produces the most results for the most corals and reef tanks. It's their assertion that it's not just about including specific spectrums, but also the ratio in relation to each other as well. I certainly think there's room for a debate as to do reefers want more options than the ability to flip those switches, knowing that ability almost always comes with little to no advice on how to use those options or switches to achieve results, or something that's pre-tuned out of the box and more or less plug-and-play results. End of the day, neither approach is wrong, and they'll both speak to different types of reefers. Contrast and sense of depth is another area where LEDs and Kessils in particular seem to really shine. Contrast is a double-edged sword where a contrasty image has shadows and light and dark areas, which produces a visually interesting image with a sense of depth. This is the type of contrast which makes the tank look natural. However, shadows and light and dark areas in the tank are not really the goal when discussing evenly illuminating the tank. The reason that LEDs and Kessils are often so good at producing that contrasty image is because of the small form factor of the dense matrix arrays. That small single point of light is a lot easier to shadow than, say, a blanket T5 light. That said, the higher you raise the LEDs and the closer you space them together, the better they'll perform, but still achieve that really solid, interesting image. I think Kessils may be amongst the best at producing a high contrast, visually appealing image. Similar to that is that Shimmer, which transitions an image from a picture of a reef in your home to what looks like a section of a living, moving reef. I think it's almost universally agreed that Kessils are the king of Shimmer in relation to LEDs, and there are two reasons for that. These small single points of light create what I would refer to as a manageable amount of shimmer that brings the tank to life. Most of the LED options out there, which include dozens of separate LEDs and individual lenses, often produce something more akin to TV static, strobe, or disco ball effect in the tank, which is significantly less appealing. The second reason goes back to the dense matrix array and how well the single lens blends all of the individual spectrums into a single cohesive spectrum. This means that you don't see the individual colors of blue, yellow, green, or red shooting or flashing all around the tank. Beyond coral health elements, this might be the single most important element on selecting a light for me personally. I just can't stand watching all the individual colors strobing around the tank. Now, some people are more sensitive to this than others, and it might not bother them at all. That said, like most things, often the biggest difference here being those who've actually seen the best and worst in person on the same tank. Once you know what good looks like, it's hard not to want it. As far as controllability goes, they do have onboard dimming, which goes from 0 to 100%, which is achieved with tuning the onboard knob. However, it's more of a set it to the right intensity and forget it function. There's no included dusk to dawn effects included with this light. However, there are some options for doing this that I'll get to in a minute. There's also no included lunar light function. Even at its lowest setting, the A360 is brighter than most reefers would use for a lunar light, so you would need something else for that cool moonlight effect. Lastly, physical appeal of the lights themselves. This is always up to personal style and interpretation, but I give them a pretty good in this case. The modules themselves are ultra low profile, which is always nice, and the suspended options or goosenecks are a decent looking mounting option. My only real complaint is if you use the controllability options, there are substantial amounts of cords involved, which certainly takes away from the clean look. This is certainly solvable with some different integrated cord solutions and routing options. Hopefully they'll prioritize that someday in the near future. I will say that they did solve all that with the AP700, a light that we'll likely cover in the near future. Moving on to the available features with mounting options, on and off-board controllability, intuitive modes, controller compatibility, build quality, and quiet operation. Mounting options are pretty simple. You can suspend them from the ceiling, which in this case is a lot easier than other lights because the light itself is so light. However, most reefers will probably go with the flexible goosenecks, which just attach to the side of the tank, both standard tanks as well as Eurobrace styles. Goosenecks make mounting pretty darn simple and quick. As to the on and off-board controllability, there's no phone app, browser, or software to run the lights, just an intensity and color knob on the light itself, more or less just twist and go. Some of you may certainly see the simplicity as limiting, but in actual use, simplicity can also be seen as a light doesn't need all that to be effective, and what makes it easy to use and adjust. If you're looking for something that has a phone app or runs software on your PC, this is just the wrong light, and I would look at something else. Again, potentially its larger brother with the AP700, which recently got updated firmware and an iPhone app. As to intuitive modes based on helping you produce successful spectrums and PAR intensities for your tank, again, the light really doesn't have modes per se. What they do have is what they call Kessil logic. When this light was first presented to me, they told me it doesn't matter what color or spectrum you set it to, they will all produce very similar results. Honestly, this sounded like a lot of BS at the time until we fully explored their claims and the logic behind it. More or less, at the heart of Kessil logic is building a blue spectrum mix which is going to produce the desired results. Now, this is too blue for most people's tank desires, and they know that you're going to want to add in green, yellow, and red spectrum into the mix until it looks good to the eye, so they do just that. We took spectrum measurements all the way from 0 to 100% color, and you can see the Kessil logic in action. At 0, you see the blue spectrum mix they built for coral health. As you step it up in color, all they're really doing is adding in green, yellow, and red spectrum, which is largely for visual appeal. This is why it stands to reason that you can use the knob and just tune it to what you personally find visually appealing without any concerns about messing up the spectrum. More or less, this is part of why the Kessil A360 is one of the very few plug-and-play LED lights out there where you can plug it in the wall and very likely achieve the success you are looking for. I'd also note that the lower par numbers are part of this. By designing a light which, when spaced as suggested, produces maximum par ranges appropriate for most corals, they basically eliminated all the issues with having to own a par meter or buying super high par lighting sources and then tuning them down to 30 or 40%. Really seems like both the Kessil logic and appropriate par numbers are part of an intuitive design based on producing results out of the box for a vast majority of users with almost no learning curve. As to controller compatibility, they are compatible with any controller which has 0 to 10 volt functionality, probably most notably the popular Apex, meaning you can ramp up both the color as well as the intensity from 0 to 100% throughout the day. However, for those of you that want the same functionality but don't want the cost or complexity of a full Aquarium controller, they also offer the pretty low-cost Spectral controller, which does all of that for you with a super easy-to-use interface. I would say almost anyone would like to dim the lights and shift the color throughout the day, so it's nice that they offer this option. As to build quality, I'm pretty sure Kessil's the only one in our industry which is actually designing and manufacturing some of their own LED diodes rather than just soldering commodity LEDs to a boards, and their dense matrix array is a patented design. If you pull the unit apart, you can also see the cooling system is pretty similar to the highly effective designs that cool the processors in most of today's computers. I would call this a well-designed, high-quality LED module, and I've personally never had any issues using them. Related to that, the fan that cools them is basically silent as well. I don't think there's any way that you could hear it over anything else in the tank. Silent operation in a living space is important to a lot of us. Hopefully today's investigation and exploration of the A360W helped some of you identify if this is the right option for your tank, or maybe even helped you better adjust the ones you already own to help achieve the desires for your tank. None of the lights out there are perfect on all fronts, but Kessil is certainly doing many things right. This is also a perfect time to ask questions and share your experiences with fellow reefers on our Reef to Reef thread pinned down below, so check that out as well. Like every week, all the stuff that we tested today we're giving away for free, so click that link that just showed up, or head on over to the site, click on the specials and deals and free stuff tab. Then sign up, because we're going to give away 4 A360s, a Spectral controller, and a gooseneck. And don't worry, if you're watching this a bit late, we give away new stuff every week, so sign up regardless. As always, if you like what we're doing here, hit that thumbs up and subscribe, because we release new BRStv episodes all week long. See you next week in the next episode of BRStv.